So, this is it now. This is the last week we have to revise for History Paper 1, because tomorrow, a week tomorrow, is the paper. So, this is scary, to be honest, because I feel severely underprepared. That's why what I want to go over today is a topic that I'm actually fairly confident on. I want to go over the welfare state today. So that's on about welfare provision, that's on about creating the NHS, and then that's on about the Education Act. What I want to do in today's stream is maybe for an hour or 40 minutes, just go over the entire welfare state topic. Then we will have half of Britain transformed completely cleared, okay? I will quickly kind of map it out so you guys can understand my headspace and what I'm kind of planning. So, obviously, theme 1 is politics, economy, and workers' rights, or the unions topic. Then theme 2 is the welfare state. So that's welfare provision, that's the NHS, and that's education. Theme 3 is social classes. So that's changing classes and social values. That includes things like the liberal society. Then that is women. And then that is race relations. Then theme 4 is the one that I have barely any knowledge of. It is living standards. AKA quality of life. It is entertainment. And it is leisure. And then theme 5 is obviously Thatcher. That's on about her economic policies, rolling back the state, and her social and political impact. So, the reason I've just spent like a minute and a bit doing that is because I want to go through and quickly just highlight which ones I need to work on and which ones I don't. First of all, theme 3, I would say I am incredibly confident on. Classes, I know about the changing, status of the classes, the decline of the upper class, the increase of the middle class and the working class, the liberal society and the liberal acts, I know a lot about that. Women is a very easy topic. One of the shortest subjects in Britain Transformed, and one of the nicest ones to get an essay on. I did one today, and it was very nice. Race relations is a bit more difficult, because you have that pre-World War II era, where a lot of things are bad. The Alien Order Act, the Special Restrictions Act. Then things get better with New Commonwealth immigration, the Commonwealth something Act, it's for something, Commonwealth Citizens Act or something like that gives citizenship to Commonwealth, people of the Commonwealth, British citizenship. Then obviously you're talking about the decline of race relations, but also some improvements. Things like the actual Race Relations Acts, but also then the restriction of Commonwealth immigration. Things like the Enoch Powell speech. So I would say that overall, I am like, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being if this topic came up, I would kill myself. 10 being if this topic came up, I would be happy. I would happily give this like an 8.5. I think the only thing that would scare me would be a badly worded race relations question or a badly worded class question. Then moving on to Thatcher, obviously this is the question where you get a lot of leeway. You get a lot of leeway because it's an extract. So you could completely forget what monetarism is, but the extract might tell you that it's to do with unemployment or solving inflation. Then you could do the rest in your head, really. You can remember that monetarism was both unemployment and cutting inflation. So I think I know Thatcher's economic policies well. I know her political impact very well, talking about New Labour, shifting parties further right. What I don't know, what I don't remember, is her social impact and her effect of rolling back the state. I remember, obviously, things like how she dealt with the strikes and how that had a social impact by breaking apart families, breaking apart communities, and those who wanted to strike, those who didn't. I don't remember anything else. And I don't remember much about her rolling back the state. I know she rolled back the civil service. I know she tried to roll back the NHS, but that failed. I don't remember anything else. So, then moving on, living standards is one we've just gone over in class. It's a boring topic. So boring. But I understand it. Entertainment and leisure, I don't understand because we haven't gone over those in a good while, and I don't like the topic. Moving on, provision, NHS and education. I'm hoping by the end of today, it will be all of this. And finally, with politics, I would literally give this like a 5. If I got asked a question on things like the Liberal Society, the Liberal Party, I would be happy. If I got asked a question about the economy in the 60s and 70s, I wouldn't know much of what to say. With unions, I would have no idea. I know there's the miners' strikes in the early 20s, the impact they had, things like the government using the OMS or the ONS to oppose the miners, giving the miners cuts in pay, the Industrial Relations Act. I don't remember much else. But the other two I would be fairly confident with. Fairly. Only if there was a specific question. Welfare, I would probably give an 8. Living standards, I would give like a 3. And Thatcher, I would give a 7.5. So the two we need to work on really is politics and living standards. I'm hoping by the end of a week, or the end of, the next week and a bit, I'll know the living standards a lot better. And I'm hoping we can do 1 or 2 streams on the economy, on the unions, on politics, so we understand it all. So, let's go over the welfare state today to make sure we don't forget anything minor. And then, obviously, I don't know if a page is over tomorrow. I'm going to go out on a limb and say probably not. So maybe tomorrow, I will be busy going over politics as well. So, let's go over, we will divide it up just like the spec. Literally dividing it. So. We have the time period of the interwar years. A time period of just past World War II. And then the time period of the 50s up until 79. So, these are always the time periods you'll get asked in exams, 9 times out of 10. You'll get asked things like, it will be one of 3 of these time periods. It always is. Like, regardless of what question, it will either centre around World War II, it will either centre around the interwar years, or it will always centre around the post-war years. You will never get a question where it's on about, the interwar years, and then, like 1918 to 1923. Like, it's going to be one of these large categories, mainly. The only time where they won't do that is if it's talking about like the Liberal Party and it wants you to, kind of tone it down a little. So, welfare state. Welfare provision in 1918. Let's get this. So, the 1920s saw significant reforms in social security provision, particularly in terms of unemployment insurance. So we have the Unemployment Insurance Acts. So this has met a lot of acts. Unemployment Insurance Act. And what does this act do? They extended unemployment insurance to 15 weeks, and therefore they needed to support the unprecedented high rates of unemployment. Fears that widespread poverty might lead to a revolution, a popular desire to support servicemen and their families. So, this extended unemployment insurance. Unemployment insurance to 15 weeks. Now, with everything in history, there are limitations. The limitation here is likely going to be the fact that they primarily did it out of a fear of revolution instead of an actual necessity. So, fear of revolution. So that would be your limitation. The Unemployment Insurance Act in the 1920s extended unemployment insurance to 15 weeks, providing insurance to those with no work, or providing money to those without work. However, there is a limitation, as this was not necessity. It was made due to a fear of revolution. Therefore, you could argue in your essay that at this point, the government isn't acting in the welfare state's best interest. That's only in these periods. Retrenchments. The onset of the Great Depression meant there was more demand on welfare provision at a time where it became less affordable. So we have the National Economy Act. National Economy Act. This act significantly reduced entitlement to and provision of benefits. So it reduced it. It introduced a means test, and it placed a cap of 6 months for which benefits had to be applied for. So it provided benefits, but at the cost of them being means tested, which is obviously a massive limitation because the tests were humiliating, and also 6 months. So every 6 months, reapply, which is a huge limitation. Hunger marches, such as the Jarrow March. So that is a consequence of this. Because remember, you're not just on about provision, you're on about the social impact. The Local Government Act closed warehouses. I also swear the Local Government Act was the one that added means testing. Hunger marches. So as a result, there were hunger marches in which unemployed men demanded the end to mean testing. So protested. So, I will go quickly on my laptop and I will have a look to see if I've missed anything. But that might be everything for the intermedios. Not a lot, which kind of worries me a little because I swear there was more information. There have been questions on welfare provision, and the fact that there's not much on the intermedios means this textbook might be wrong. Which I would hope would not be the case. Right. So, the 1911 National Insurance Act, right, already it's missed out a lot of things. Already it's missed out a shit ton of information. Wow, this is a shit textbook, okay. You know what, we might as well just rub this out and start again, because that textbook provided me with zero information there, compared to what I've already had written down. Not that I've remembered it, of course, that's why we're doing this stream, but the fact that I've written down more information is worrying. Right, we have the 1911 National Insurance Act. This act provided a limited amount of money, $160 a year, $160 a year. Let's have a look at the limitations to the NI Act, and also I might as well pull up a past paper with this on so we can look at the indicative content. It was restricted to trades which suffered from unemployment and those in decline, so it only benefited a small amount of industries. So you could just say manufacturing industries there. So that is our first point. The 1911 NI Act, National Insurance Act, only benefit a small amount of industries, so incredibly limited. Now, there is a past paper specifically on welfare provision in 2020. Let's have a quick look at this and see what content we can pick up. Do forgive me, guys, because this is taking a good while, but anyways. Right. Poverty assistance saw significant difference in the latter period, such as the establishment of the National Assistance Board. The creation of the NHS was a major departure in the provision. There were numerous... So that's on about all of the post-war stuff. Meanwhile, in the interwar, unemployment provision remained broadly similar, with benefit provision being linked to contributions. So you had to pay contributions, I remember that. You had to pay contributions. Across both periods, national insurance payments from employers. The system of state contributory finished first with Old Age Pensions Act. Oh my god, why is this such a difficult mark scheme to understand? Oh my god, why is that mark scheme so difficult? What the fuck? Okay. Let's just carry on, because clearly the mark scheme there is not helping. The 1920 Unemployment Insurance Act was longer term. So yeah, I remember this. Was not helped by this. Well, then on the 1920s Unemployment Insurance Act. So this affected 2/3 of workers. Okay, those not affected by national insurance. Then we have the Local Government Act. This is the means test. Basically, the Public Assistance Committee used the means test to test claimants for benefits. So, means test, and every 6 months you had to apply. Reapply. So that the Local Government Act was in 1929. Then during the Depression period, it's the 1934 Unemployment Act. And this act provides 26 weeks of benefit payments to millions of workers who paid into the scheme. 1 million who had no entitlement had insurance. So that is a significant one, the Unemployment Act. So 26 weeks. That's an easy one to remember because that's just half of a year. 26 weeks of benefit payments. To about 14 million workers. The Act also created the National Unemployment Assistance Board to help 1 million who had no entitlement. So, that is officially everything in terms of the extent and nature of welfare provision. The only other thing to go on is the idea that housing needs were not met, but there are about 4 million houses built in the interwar years. 4 million homes, but housing needs not met. So that is everything in terms of the interwar period and how it affected provision of welfare. Some pretty basic ones there, but I think this is memorable. I really think this is memorable, right? Look, we have the National Insurance Act, which is literally just a incredibly limited way of paying. National insurance was just benefits, right? The National Insurance Act is just benefits for those who don't have work. So National Insurance Act paid those who couldn't get jobs. I need to check that actually. (1911) National Insurance Act. I want to make sure that I'm not misinterpreting what benefits are. National insurance, yeah, loss of income related. So it's sick pay and unemployment. So in an exam, you could literally say, let's say your question was, how different was provision of welfare in the interwar years compared to post-World War II? You could say in the interwar years it is somewhat limited. You have the NI Act, which paid benefits, unemployment benefits slash sick pay to a very small amount of industries. There were some improvements, such as the 1920 Unemployment Insurance Act, which covered 2/3 of workers, but you could argue overall maybe that it was limited because of the Local Government Act being means tested, the housing, extent to housing being cut off. But again, you would have to balance your argument here. Looks like these two are your positives and that, and then these are your negatives. So you have a decent amount to argue back and forth. Next is World War II and the idea of a consensus government. You have, first of all, the New Towns Act, covering a lot of, I don't even need to write that one down because I know it, but building hundreds of thousands of housing. This was not met, so there was still an issue with overcrowding. So just the idea there that there's continuity here between failure to meet New Towns Act and the failure to meet quotas. Then we move on to the National Insurance Acts. Obviously a big one with the welfare state is the nationalisation of industries such as steel. And this led to less unemployment. Because obviously more job opportunities. Now, we have 3 acts here. It looks like there's some big ones. The family allowance, I remember this one. Family Allowance Act, the National Insurance Act, and the National Assistance Act. Easiest one to remember is family allowance. All this did is it paid benefits to mothers with over 2+ children. This was a significant change because it paid them directly to the women, allowing women to support themselves, their family, in a time where obviously men were, obviously post-war, were dead. So yeah. Paid directly to women with 2+ children, help women whose husbands were killed during the war. Then we move on to another simple act, the National Assistance Act. This literally just provided financial support. It wasn't means tested, but it was not universal. So financial support, which is where the word assistance comes in, financial support, but limitations because it was not means tested, which is a good thing, but it was not universal. Finally is the National Insurance Act. So, all working people paid a weekly contribution. Weekly contribution. Things like sickness or unemployment benefits, old age pensions, and maternity pay. So you don't even need to really reference this in an exam, yeah, but I won't need to write that down. That's an easy one to remember. National insurance, unemployment benefits, sick pay, maternity leave, and pensions. Limitations is for weekly contributions were expensive at 5% of weekly earnings. which was expensive. Pensions were still low, and self-employed and married women were not covered. So, that is the interwar years and World War II. So, clearly there's a bit of continuity here, mainly the whole thing about housing. We can talk about the contrast of the National Insurance Acts. The first one only covers a small amount of industries, very minor contributions. The second National Insurance Act, here, during the welfare state, is every working person pays a weekly contribution. It's for things like sick pay, maternity leave, unemployment, or old age pensions. You had to pay 5% of your weekly earnings, which was a lot, and it was limited because pensions were still low, and married and self-employed people couldn't be covered. Family Allowance Act just paid money to mothers directly, those with 2+ children, so that they could support themselves. And the National Assistance Act is just financial assistance. But you had to provide proof, and it was not universal. Now, there is all the rest missing. There's a whole section on increasing challenges to provision, and I don't know what that is. Ah, I remember the new right. So opposition in terms of the new right. In the early 1970s, the political consensus over welfare began to break down. Supporters of the new right argue that social welfare trapped people in a culture of dependency. So they argued dependency. Dependency due to unemployment benefits. They argue the growing welfare bills were diverting resources from economic growth. So, two huge points. Dependency, because of benefits, and the cost took away from economic growth. So, I can think of a lot of exam questions where you could refer to the new right. You could refer to the new right in a question about provision. You could say that that's what led to a decline of it. But I would say if you got a question on opposition to the welfare state, one paragraph could be talking about this whole section. Another paragraph could be on about the, the IBM, the International Board of Medicine, something like that Bevan opposed. Another one could just be like the cost, I don't know, but I can think of some uses. Welfare provision. So the National Insurance Act in the 1970s was even better, so there's sustained improvement. This gave pension rights to hundreds of thousands. 100,000 plus benefits or pension rights to those with no prior access. Introduce an attendance allowance for people who needed long-term care. So there were challenges to this new act. Welfare and freedom. Many felt it was wrong for taxpayers to pay for welfare benefits. Many felt it was an inefficient way of spending money as there was no benefits. Many argue welfare caused dependency. Then we talk about Labour taking the IMF loan. I don't remember which Prime Minister this was. It might have been Wilson. I don't recall. But the Labour government had to retrench and cut the welfare budget. There was an emerging consensus that Britain simply could no longer afford to provide welfare. And there were also changing social attitudes. The changing attitudes were less collectivist. So less collectivist, also opposition to high taxes. So, that is the entire welfare provision topic right there. So, let's quickly go over this and talk about it. So each time period has its own National Insurance Act, and we can see it developing over time. To begin with, the 1911 National Insurance Act is limited. Only a small amount of industries benefit from it, and you have to pay 106 year, in contributions. Contrarily, the National Insurance Act in post-World War II, in the welfare state, gives it to all working people who paid a weekly contribution. This was limited because the pensions were low and married and self-employed people weren't covered. And again, it's 5% of your wage, which was a lot. Then, the National Insurance Act in the 1970s backs this up more, giving pension rights to hundreds of thousands, and overall being more accessible. In the interwar years, we did have some positive changes, mainly the Unemployment Insurance Act, which provided 2/3 of workers, or basically those not affected by national insurance. Also, the Unemployment Act. So both of these are Unemployment Acts. That's a good way to remember it. UI, UA. So the interwar years have Unemployment and Unemployment Acts. Unemployment Insurance, Unemployment Acts. So 2/3 of workers. The Unemployment Act gave half a year worth of leave, paid leave, to millions of workers, and 1 million with no entitlement was still helped. Some disadvantages were, of course, the means-tested Local Government Act, which did provide benefits, but obviously the means tests were very controversial, leading to hunger marches. And finally, 4 million homes were built. Oh my god, I'm so tired. The housing needs were not met. So overall, just trying to slowly crank this up. Overall, if we got our exam question now, our question is on how different was the provision of welfare in the years 1945 to 79 from the provision of welfare in 1918 to 39. So, what would we argue here? How different? Well, we would argue that there were significant differences. Firstly, this National Insurance Act is very limited. Meanwhile, these two aren't limited. They are significantly better. Still limited, but not by much. You would argue that means tests were completely averted in this time period. It became way more accessible with things like the National Assistance Act. You would argue there was still means testing, just that it was not directly needed to happen. And then obviously things like the building of houses was limited through both time periods. You could argue that the Unemployment Act was a solid change, and therefore it's continuity, not change. You would argue that there was equal amounts of opposition in both well, to begin with, in the interwar years, there's opposition due to the means test, but by the end, there's opposition due to how generous it is. So you could argue there's a change in opposition. That would be a bad question, though. Like, this paper is bad questions. You have a question on living standards and how those saw improvements. That would be a decent-ish question, I would say. That would be decent-ish. As long as the question is, you know, like you could talk about the consumer boom, how in World War II, things like rationing. I would need to sit down and kind of mind map that out. My head is in such a spin. What the hell? Man, I might take a quick break and then probably later tonight we'll go on and do welfare and education. NHS.